So what is a good game? I think this is it's a really simple question. I thought about it for a long time. I've been thinking about it actually in my job for the past 2 years. That's basically my job, right? So I want to share with you a little bit about what it is that we've actually come up with as our answer. So really quickly, let me just introduce our company, and it'll probably just be one slide. So, because I've done enough advertising for VNG already in past speeches, so I'm actually going to talk about something meaningful this time, right? We're headquartered in Vietnam. We have offices in Ho Chi Minh City, Da Nang, Hanoi, and now Singapore, Thailand, and somewhere in Indonesia as well. We're the first game startup in Vietnam, and definitely one of the biggest ones in Southeast Asia now that we have over 2,000 employees. We transitioned to become a platform company about 6 years ago when we started making a platform called Zing Me, which in Vietnam now is the #2 social network after Facebook. Although Facebook has been blocked recently in Vietnam, so we're kind of coming back. And then we also have a lot of other platforms like Zalo, which is kind of like the WeChat/Line, KakaoTalk of Vietnam. We've just passed 50 million total registered users. And our game publishing strategy is based on platforms. It's based on using Zing MP3, Zing News, Zing TV, Talk TV, Zalo, and all these different platforms, which are respectively, we have video streaming, game streaming, music, and taking all the users that we get from these free platforms and pushing them into games, right? Which is our way to monetize. Of course, we do ads as well, but in Vietnam, online advertising is still quite small compared to games, and e-commerce is growing, but at this point, it's just it's not a viable option for making money yet. But you ask me again in 3 or 4 years, right? So that's what VNG has been doing. And recently, last year, we started expanding into Southeast Asia to do publishing in all the 10 Southeast Asia regions. And I'm going to be sharing with you a little bit about what our strategy has been to taking games for Vietnam, taking games for Vietnam and the whole Southeast Asia region, because there's quite a big difference in there. So yeah, really quickly, I'll just this slide. I actually forgot that I slid it in there as well. We look a little differently than a lot of other game publishers, mainly because we have a platform. So we're kind of like a Tencent in Vietnam, which is what we're often called. Is because most publishers they're chasing high quality games. As Robin said before, MMORPGs are really popular in Southeast Asia. They make a lot of money. Very good margins, right? And it's also a smaller user base, right? You can have a MMORPG in Southeast Asia with 20, 30,000 DAU and still be making $500,000 a month, right? Potentially, if you have a very good operations team. So that's why you see that right now the trend is, in whether it's in China or Korea or Southeast Asia, is to be making MMORPGs and to an extent MOBA games and SLGs. And that reason is because there's less investment required to get a mass base of users. For us, because we have platforms like Zalo, we're able to push out ourselves to millions of users without spending this user acquisition money, which is very expensive. As a result, we focus on a large different group of genres, and we're able to be lucky to be able to also push casual games and card battle games and racing games and all different sorts of games. And then you'll see it clearer as well too, because if you look at markets such as Japan or Korea or China, those are the only markets in the world basically, and Taiwan and Thailand, where there are casual games that are really popular that are not global casual games, like Talking Tom or some Heyday or some sort, which is global. They actually have locally developed casual games that are big. And the main reason is because they have these big platforms to push out for them. So first of all is how do we target our users, right? And who are our users? So what we look for. Number one thing that I think that we've been really focusing on a lot in Vietnam, and we're noticing in Southeast Asia, sorry, it used to be number one, but it's getting lower now, is phone specs. I think this is a big issue when we're looking at games, especially coming from developers who don't have much experience developing for countries like Vietnam. Is that, you know, in Vietnam, at least for the PC gaming stage, I'd say, you know, 70 or 80% of the revenue was from games from China, right? And at that time, actually, Korea made some of the best PC-based games, right? You've got games like MU Origin and Ragnarok Online, you know, Guild Wars. Those are all really big games based in Korea. But if you do a research on the PC game cafes in Vietnam and the specs of those PCs, you'll realize that most of the Korean games can't really be played on such low specs and low internet speed as well, right? So for us, it's really important when we look at mobile games as well, especially with this messy Android market, is that right now we look really carefully at the specs. We look at the client sides, right? If the client sides is anything over 200 megabytes, we have to be really careful unless it's a very hardcore game, because you have a huge Android market with very low-end spec phones, right? At the same time, we're very careful about exactly how much RAM this game uses as well as too. And you know, in a future update, if you look at the VNG upsite, we're considering going to be putting some notes about what specifications we use as well too. Secondly, what's really important for us is, I think that's different from other markets, is gaming experience. I think that when you look at a lot of global markets and when you launch games for global, the tutorials, especially for Western games, the tutorials are not extremely in-depth, right? It's sort of like, okay, come in, you know how to play this game, right? And you sort of get into it. Whereas if you look at games that come into Southeast Asia, especially in markets in Vietnam, or if you look at other Asian markets, there's a really clear, they treat you like a kid sometimes, which is, in the future, I think will change, but at this moment at least, it's really important because you have a lot of first-time users. You have a lot of first-time smartphone users as well. So the tutorial often needs to go really simply from like, okay, click here and then drag here to attack, right? It's really simple, basic tutorials that when you play many Western games, hardcore games that you see from EA or Disney, they don't even tell you. They're just like, this is self-explanatory, you can figure it out. But the gaming experience and especially tutorial and teaching you how to pay as well too, right? Because the payment monetization actually tends to be a lot more complicated for a lot of the free-to-play games that come into Asia. There's a lot of teaching you about, okay, if you buy this VIP package, you will get this, and they teach you a lot in game about what you're going to get, and users are sort of used to that as well. So for us, we've really went really deep into that, and there's definitely a big difference between games that have a really deep tutorial as opposed to games that don't in terms of user retention and user payment as well. The second thing, one thing that we really look at when we bring our games on is the IP, right? And basically it's for branding, right? Because the better IP you have, the cheaper your user acquisition is going to be. It's basically you're cutting back on your marketing costs, right? By having a really good IP. Now, what are the IPs that are popular in Southeast Asia, right? For us, for our experience in Vietnam, generally the Chinese IPs are very big in terms of martial arts, right? Martial arts novels, Three Kingdoms, Fantasy Westward Journey are big too. But Three Kingdoms and Fantasy Westward Journey, these are sort of IPs that work in China, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, and Singapore, actually, and Malaysia to an extent with the Chinese-speaking population. However, these IPs are everywhere because they're free, right? They've been written hundreds of years ago and no one has the rights to them. So everyone uses them. And games with Three Kingdoms IP are all over the place. So you won't really get a cheaper user acquisition cost from this IP. What you will get cheaper costs with is the sort of the martial arts IP, which in Vietnam works really well towards an older audience. The older audience is really, really popular with the old martial arts novels. But as in most places in Southeast Asia, once you get to a younger audience, a lot of the Japanese manga IPs, some of the Korean drama IPs, if you ever make, you know, Who He Comes From the Stars into a MMORPG, I'm sure you'll get a lot of free users. And a lot of the Western IPs are very popular as well too. So it's sort of an age group, right? In Southeast Asia, we've seen that a lot of Western IPs are popular among all age groups. But in Vietnam, when you put a martial arts IP in there, you know you will be getting an older high-paying, high revenue sort of age group that's going to come into your game, right? Whereas if you use some of the Western or Japanese IPs, you'll be getting a younger user base, maybe even a wider user base, because that group is so hardcore in terms of playing games. But you don't expect the payment to be too high in the beginning, right? And of course, we expect this to change as the population matures as well. Now, how much does IP strengthen your brand? We've been doing a lot of discussion about this as well too, and and if you look at here, I'm actually starting the movie. Like, movies are great, right? Everyone wants like a Jurassic Park IP, but actually, the Jurassic Park IP after the movie is over, it's not really there anymore, right? After the Transformers movie is over, you're not really thinking about Transformers anymore. And except for if you're Marvel's been doing a great job, right? They're like a TV show. You will be getting a continuous sort of IP, like remembrance into the user memory. But generally, we put movies as sort of the lowest, because usually movies, after it's over, you won't get another one for 2 or 3 years. And then we'll go for books, right? A lot of those novels are very popular, especially martial arts novels or novels that have sort of some fantasy in them as well too, whether if it's Game of Thrones or some Jin Yong novels. Game IPs are good as well. You see King of Fighters, you've seen Warcraft and Dota IPs be very strong, not because there's a wide user base, but because it targets the right user base that's already playing games. The manga is also very good. If you look at manga like Conan or like, they go on forever, right? Like, they can go on for literally 15, 20 years and not finish and still be interesting. And of course, for us, actually, the best is usually TV show. The TV show, if you can launch your game during the time that a TV show is coming out, you're gonna have a really strong, really cheap UA cost, because the TV show users tend to be really hardcore loyal to that brand, especially in the time the TV show is showing. And this TV show will show every week. So for that season, or second season, or third season, you'll be having recurring sort of branding for this game as well too. So that's sort of the content strategy that VNG is also looking into, especially in Vietnam, in that because we have a really big music portal called Zing MP3. So we're actually potentially transitioning into one of the biggest sort of music agencies and studios as well too, and potentially movies, because we have Zing TV, is that we see this sort of higher level thing, instead of publishing games, being sort of content creation, right? Especially local content creation, where you're able to create TV shows and movies and make them into games, right? Next is the gameplays that we're doing. And as I've said, we've been pretty lucky to be able to do a lot of different kind of games, mainly because our user acquisition costs are lowered because we're a platform company. But just in general, whether you're a platform company or not, I want to go over a little bit about each genre of games and how our experience has been in Southeast Asia with these games. Poker and board games, of course, are always going to be great. That's our biggest moneymaker at the moment. Zingplay, it's making, this is open information, nearly $2 million a month gross revenue just in Vietnam. So these are big. These are big games, and card and poker games are games that will go on forever. Basically, they have an extremely long life cycle, and and users will grow naturally, organically without it. Of course, as long as you make sure that you have a good enough relationship with local authorities so that you don't get in trouble, right? Card battle games, for us, whether they're traditional card battle games or the action ones where you kind of have to move around and move with them, like Dota or KOF, we think those games are sort of a little bit on the downturn as well too, unless you have really strong innovation. Because I'd say 2 or 3 years ago, these were all the rage. Everyone wanted to collect better cards, and it was just really simple for you to have card battle games, because most of them you don't really do much control. You sort of let them attack and you just wait, right? And maybe you do some micromanagement in terms of using a skill or adding some formation. But in general, card battle games right now, because there's so many on the market, it's sort of falling down a little bit unless there's a really strong new innovation in gameplay. A really big thing that's coming into the market recently is mobile games, right? Mobile games, I know there's not many on the market yet. There's a few like Vainglory or Ace of Arena that are doing very well. We've seen that in China right now, they've already made some games that really look like League of Legends on mobile. And I think the day that those games start going over abroad, once they work out the relationship with Riot, then we're going to be seeing a big a rise in mobile games onto mobile. Because if you've tried some of those games, even including Vainglory and whatnot, they have very good user experience, and it really feels like League of Legends on mobile now, which is really what users are looking for, especially the ones that are well balanced in terms of monetization, not the ones where you can pay a lot and just become extremely strong, right? RPG games, I don't think there's much to be said. You're always going to make money with good RPG games as long as they have really good IP at this day. I think right now you cannot make an RPG game with no IP and expect it to be really successful. It's got to be, because users have seen it all in terms of gameplay. I mean, you've got to innovate a lot. But if you have a strong IP with a good gameplay and monetization design, RPGs are still the most solid source of revenue in Southeast Asia, and I think the Asia region as a whole. SLG games, of course, a very small group, but very hardcore group. Once you get some of these users, they will eventually tell all their friends, and you'll get all the users as well too. We see a really high potential for SLGs in Southeast Asia, and I'm not talking about like Clash of Clans SLG as well. Although because I feel like that kind of genre is dominated by Finland, right? So you've got, but I'm talking about turn-based SLGs, right? Like a game of war, as well too, and games that are sort of turn-based, moving as well. We don't see a lot of, we see a lot of growth for games like Clash of Kings in Southeast Asia for those hardcore users in terms of revenue. And these games are very long-lasting as well. FPS games, we think, is potentially the biggest potential for mobile right now, even greater than MOBA. If you look at FPS games, we see that it still hasn't taken off a lot. We know Glue has made some pretty good FPS games, but if you look at Crossfire in China right now, it's crossed the $100 million a month revenue. So that's something that you see that high potential FPS games right now moving into the market. Even in Vietnam right now, we have FPS games that have more than 500,000 daily active users as well. And FPS games, you really have to look into, which kind of FPS game you're going to have. There's sort of two, right? There's one that's the auto-moving and really easy for you to play, that everyone can play, and there's the hardcore ones, where you have to move and shoot together with two hands. And those are the ones that are really suitable for esports, right? Sports games also as well too, we know that's strong with basically FIFA, right? And the last two categories that VNG is really looking into is female games and casual games. As I've said, most of the Southeast Asia market, except for the markets where there's line, the casual games are dominated by globally published Western companies, right? However, because these Western companies generally do not put third-party payment into the Southeast Asian markets, so as a result, they're probably not getting that high revenue from these markets anyway, right? For example, in Vietnam, 90% or 85% of revenue is from third-party payment, right? Like telco payment or SMS payment or local bank card payment, which Google and Apple doesn't yet provide. Well, Google provides a little bit for one provider, but still only 10 to 20% come from actual official App Store payments. So, which is why Vietnam is right now the biggest gaming market in Southeast Asia, but if you look at App Annie or other charts, you'll think it's one of the smallest because everything is third party as well. So we think casual game, is going to be a really big market, especially in Vietnam, because once we start pushing forward with our platforms and having a lot of social engagement, right? We think viral is so important with social games, with casual games also, and we think it's going to be the next big boom, right? So we hope that in the next year, a lot of those people with good casual games will be able to give us a chance to take a look at your games. Whether they're farming games or racing games or dancing games or matching games, there's all sorts, right? And the picture there is a game called Disney Catch Catch, which we signed from Korea with Disney and a Korean developer, which is kind of like a find the difference between the two pictures. And that's going to be launching on Zalo next month as well too. And we hope it's going to be just take off, right? And then of course female games. This is the big sector that's sort of been caught up in the West. In the West, there's a lot of Kim Kardashian or whatever it is, dressing games that are out there. But in Asia, in Southeast Asia, at least in Vietnam, there's basically none with localized games for girls. we just launched one, a Japanese style game from Shanghai developer, and it just took off. It was a big boom. And we found out that girl gamers were just waiting to pay, right? They weren't paying very much, but they were paying very frequently, right? And we think that this is also a big opportunity in the market as well too, and I believe so as well in the rest of the Southeast Asia market. So what are the factors to decide sort of like a conclusion, a summary of what we've been saying? What I look at mainly when we look at a game is first I look at the game performance, right? I trust my evaluation team a lot, but not as much as I trust the charts, right? So for us, the first thing we usually look at is the gross rankings. I think being in Southeast Asia, you have the luxury of being able to follow after other markets. For example, when we've talked to companies like Disney or EA, they've been willing to sort of cut out the Southeast Asia market for us, right? And they'll launch the game first, and then we'll sort of take the game afterwards in a few months if the performance is good, right? In China, they only launched the game in China. In Korea, they only launched the game in Korea, right? So it's easy for us. We can wait and see the charts, how the charts go, and after 6 months, we'll decide, hey, will we take this game, right? Only for an extremely large, big IP will we ever try to take the game before it's even launched, right? So generally, what we can do in Southeast Asia for you is that if your game is launched elsewhere without our local language and local billing, local payment, right, what we can do as a publisher is we can help you with local language, localization, local billing, operations, customer service, and of course marketing, right? I think marketing is sort of our big advantage in that we have a really strong back-end system and a marketing team in terms of user acquisition and branding. And in Vietnam, we have a huge advantage because we have all the platforms, right? Basically 50 million users on Zalo crosses almost 95% of all users in Vietnam at the moment. Market fit as well too. Like I said, if you look at, there's different countries in Southeast Asia have different tastes, especially in IP and in gameplay as well too. In Vietnam, it's purely MMORPG market that's the strongest. But at the same time, we see a lot of room for growth for other genres. If you look at Singapore, it's a very westernized, close to westernized market, as well as Malaysia and Philippines. So a lot of Western game styles are played. And Thailand, you see a lot of successful games are actually from Korea as well, like Seven Knights, and a lot of the CJ and Netmarble games are very popular. Developer background, we always make sure to visit the developer and really understand how strong their teams are. For mobile games, we know that most of the companies now, they're covering, if you're doing a global version, you're usually not looking for us as a publisher anyway, right? But if you're doing each market-specific version, you might be doing a China version, a Korea version, a Japan version, a global version, a Middle East version, right? So there's a lot of work to be doing, right? For every single version, you're gonna have to connect to local SDKs. Every single version, you have to do client and change the text in the client as well. So we know that goes to a lot of work. So for us, it's really important. Does the developer has experience doing this? Is the development team strong? Do they really have a deadline that's pushing them to get to a launch on a certain time, right? So that's really important for us as well. Late game monetization is something that we really like in a lot of like Korean and Chinese games, and we feel like that a lot of other games we see in other markets don't do as well. They're not as strong, I think, in terms of late game monetization, because if you see a lot of the big games in Northeast Asia, there's a lot of late game like alliance versus alliance, guild versus guild, a lot of social elements, and a lot of really strong monetization features that we look for. And we've sort of been pushing our Western partners as well too to sort of also make the late game monetization really strong, because I think the Western mindset is sort of like, let's keep it balanced. We don't have to make people can pay later, and which is a really good mindset, and you see it works in games like League of Legends. But for certain games like MMORPGs or card battle games, usually you only have a certain cycle which you can keep the user before they move on to another game. So if if you're not able to really monetize at a certain stage, once a user gets to get to a certain level, you're sort of going to miss that wave, and we see that in a lot of games, especially games that don't focus. I've been playing on Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes from EA a lot, which is doing okay in Asia, but it's getting a lot better now. Is that in the game in the beginning it was basically just PVE, right? And then I could make friends, but I couldn't really talk to them. There was no guilds, and I saw just recently in their most recent update they put in guilds, right? And you're able to talk to your guild members and fight on raids together. You haven't fought guild versus guild yet, but they have leaderboards for which guild is the strongest, which players kill the most. And I saw just the rise in the grossing, and the grossing revenue ranks is meteoric. It's like 200% rank rising just after you put guilds in there as well too, right? So I think for a lot of these monetization modes, I just think like it needs to be faster, right? Because this game probably took more than half a year before we're able to get guilds, right? And I just think that it could be something that's done faster. So for us, what we're doing now, in terms of IP, is the last thing I really want to talk about a little bit more, is that for us, and I want to advertise for VNG a little bit too in the end. What we really pride ourselves in also is that what we've been able to do is, one is we've taken a lot of famous IPs from other countries and we've really made them really successful in Vietnam. And what we have also done is take games that didn't have IPs and create IPs out of them, right? And I think that's where, if you're a game developer, like we develop our own games as well too, is that if you can create your own IP, that's still the best possible thing to do, because you really own the IP yourself. And I still encourage, we've talked about IP for a long time, about using Japanese anime IPs or Disney IPs or Warner Brothers IPs. But in the end of the day, if you can, in your local regional market, create your own IP, that's very strong with a really good story and a successful game, for us, that's still like the highest level of game making, right? So I just want to encourage that one more time. Okay, so for us, I think it's important for us as well, when I talk about it, is where are the suppliers, right? Currently, like I said, for mobile games right now in VNG, maybe our revenue is a good percentage from our own development, a really high percentage from China, a rather fractional percentage from Korea as well too. Some from Western developers is quite small. From Japanese developers is almost nothing right now, nil as well. And I think this goes back to some of the questions I talked to before about specs, right? The specs of the games, the IP that's popular, right? I think in Southeast Asia, across the whole region, you'll have a really diverse tastes. And if you look at, for example, Japanese games, right? We have 0 Japanese games in our portfolio, right? Does that mean that Japanese games are not good? No, it really doesn't. And Japanese IP is extremely popular, right? Just the issue, of course, is Japanese games are so hardcore and so suitable for their own market that when they've been brought to Vietnam in the past, with games like Brave Frontier that have been really successful in other markets, they just tend to sort of crash and burn. And I think one of the main reasons is the game style, right? Like how you teach the game, how hardcore the game is. Japanese games and a lot of Western games sort of tend to monetize differently, right? If you look at a game from China, the users that are rich will pay like 90% of the money, right? And the users who are poor will be 90% of the users, but pay just 10% of the money, right? And that reflects a big rich-poor gap in society, right? And Vietnam is really similar to that, in which 90% of the users will pay 90%, well, 10% of the users will pay 90% of the revenue, whereas everyone else is sort of just playing with them, right? And if you look at countries that are more developed, like Korea or Japan or US, everyone can pay $10 or $20, right? Everyone is okay with paying a medium amount because there's such a big middle class. And then when you come to Vietnam and you have that kind of game monetization where everyone's supposed to pay $20, well, this 90%, I mean, this small 10% of the people with 90% of the money, they can pay those $10. But the 90% of the people with only 10% of money, they can't pay those $10, right? So what happens is you're not getting the money, you're not getting the full money from the really rich gamers, and you're not getting any money from the people who don't have much money, right? So you can see for us, it's like the monetization model is such a big thinking for us. And I don't mean to say that you should do this kind of monetization model because it's only useful for countries where the income gap is really large. But if you're going to come to Vietnam or even China or some companies of similar economic stature, maybe even Indonesia, I don't know at this moment because we're still testing there, is that you should really consider in your monetization how to really take care of these high 10% of users who have a lot of the money and make sure that they're able to have a lot of fun and feel very powerful and very strong in the server, right? While at the same time that the people who are very low levels who don't pay feel like they're having their own fun. And they're not just getting totally destroyed by the top 10%. But at the same time, the top 10%, I gotta feel they're better. So how do you do that, right? And there's a lot of different ways for game design. I think you can talk to a game designer on that in terms of different skin, like character selection, skins, and different levels suited for different people. But if you don't do that, your game balance will be distorted, right? And gamers will leave your game very quickly. For example, if you just pay money, you become very strong. Then there's nobody to play with you because if you just keep getting killed, you're going to leave the game, right? And lastly, for European and American sort of developers, it's been really hard for us to work with them. We've been lucky to work with Disney recently. Is that most American games and European games they don't want to do the local payment for Vietnam or Southeast Asia. They're happy doing a global version. And making money on most of the developed markets. But if you really want to take advantage of these Southeast Asian markets where third-party payment is, even outside of Vietnam, except for Singapore, at least in Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia will be more than 50% of revenue, you will have to work with a local publisher. And I think that is where, it's been very hard for us to convince them because they feel the revenue is so small. To be able to do a special version just for Southeast Asia. Okay, and then for me, that's it. What is a good game is really, it seems like a really simple question, but for us, it's boiled down to a lot of factors that we've been considering a long time over the course of our business history. We still haven't gotten it down yet, but we're always open to discuss and really find out which games we can take that are really good for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christopher.